Mary Flora Bell was born into a world that never wanted her. From the moment she took her first breath on May 26, 1957, in Newcastle upon Tyne, England, the odds were already stacked against her. Her mother, Betty Bell, was just 17 when she gave birth, and far from being nurturing or supportive, she was cold, erratic, and deeply disturbed. Allegedly working as a sex worker, Betty was frequently absent, sometimes gone for days or even weeks. Rumors in the neighborhood whispered that she had attempted to give Mary away more than once to strangers, to acquaintances, to anyone who would take the burden of a child she never wanted. Whether this was out of desperation, cruelty, or simply recklessness was never clear. But what became clear, over time, was that Mary was a child shaped by pain. Home life was a nightmarish carousel of emotional and physical neglect. In some accounts, Betty was believed to have purposefully harmed her daughter on several occasions, once even allegedly attempting to overdose Mary on sleeping pills disguised as candy. These stories were difficult to verify, shrouded in the silence of the era and the blind eyes of neighbors who preferred not to get involved. But what could not be ignored was the environment Mary was raised in, one filled with chaos, violence, and adult activities no child should witness. By the time she entered school, Mary had already become withdrawn, volatile, and eerily quiet at times, then suddenly explosive at others. Teachers noticed her strange behavior. She was unusually articulate for her age, but had a disturbing sense of detachment. Her eyes were cold, observing everything but revealing nothing. When other children cried or got hurt, Mary didn't flinch. Instead, she sometimes smirked. One teacher remembered her as bright but dangerous, and even mentioned her tendency to act out aggressively toward her classmates. She was known to punch, kick, and even choke other children during play. On one occasion, a classmate told school staff that Mary had tried to strangle her. When questioned, Mary smiled and claimed she was only joking. It was a chilling glimpse into the mind of a child who was already slipping through the cracks in the neighborhood of Scotswood, where poverty gripped nearly every household. Children often roamed the streets freely. Mary, unsupervised and untamed, quickly developed a reputation among the local kids. She wasn't like the others. She didn't laugh at jokes or play tag for fun. Instead, she fixated on death. Dead birds fascinated her. She was seen once attempting to bury one with mock ceremony, only to dig it up again and mutilate it. She would tell other children things like, "What would it feel like to kill someone?" At first, they laughed, but soon, they grew afraid of her. Even the local boys kept their distance. Despite the red flags, Mary found a companion in Norma Bell. Though they shared a surname, they were not related. Norma was simple-minded, timid, and often nervous. She followed Mary's lead like a shadow, rarely questioning her. Mary relished the control. Together, the girls began acting out disturbing scenes, pretending to strangle each other, mimicking the deaths of animals, giggling after scaring other children. It was clear Mary was the ringleader. Norma was simply along for the ride, swept up in the wake of someone far more manipulative. The adults in Scotswood saw them as odd, but harmless. Two troubled girls from difficult homes, but just children. Nonetheless, no one could imagine that anything truly sinister was forming. Even when Mary began showing signs of deeper psychopathy, such as lying about injuries she inflicted on others, or casually discussing death, the system failed to intervene. Social services had been alerted multiple times about her home life, but no action was taken beyond a few routine visits. To them, Mary was just another child in a long line of forgotten cases. By age 10, Mary's demeanor had hardened. She spoke with defiance, but rarely showed real emotion. She became increasingly curious about pain, not her own, but others. Once, when a boy fell off a swing and broke his arm, Mary stood nearby watching with fascination. She didn't run for help. She didn't react. She just stared at school. Her drawings became darker. Stick figures with X's for eyes. Children falling from buildings. She told one teacher she dreamed about killing someone and getting away with it. The teacher chalked it up to attention-seeking behavior. But Mary wasn't crying out for help. She was rehearsing. As the summer of 1968 approached, Mary was no longer content with fantasizing. Her games with Norma grew more violent, and her talk about death became more frequent. She began asking other children odd questions. Do you think it hurts when you die? Or how long do you think it takes to stop breathing? No one understood how serious she was. No one realized that in her young, twisted mind, she had already made a decision. She didn't want to hurt someone. She wanted to kill. It was the day before her 11th birthday, May 25, 1968, when Mary Bell took her first life. The sun was out, casting its usual light over the working-class neighborhood of Scotswood, a place filled with crumbling brick buildings, overgrown lots, and children who spent more time outside than in. To most people, it seemed like an ordinary Saturday. But for Mary, it was the culmination of weeks, maybe months, of dark thoughts that had finally taken root and grown into something irreversible. 4-year-old Martin Brown was playing near an abandoned house, a crumbling building set for demolition. It was a place where the neighborhood children often ventured, climbing through broken windows and jumping across gaps in the rotting floors. But Martin wasn't like the older boys who knew the dangers. He was a baby in comparisons, small, trusting, and unaware of what lurked behind the shadows of the derelict structure. Mary had seen him earlier that morning. According to later testimonies, she watched him for a while before approaching. Number 1 knows exactly what she said to convince him to follow her. Maybe she promised a secret game. Maybe she said she found a kitten or some treasure. Whatever it was, Martin went with her. Inside the building, no screams were heard. No struggle. Just silence. Mary smothered him with her bare hands calmly, deliberately, as if she were acting out a script she had memorized in her head. Martin's body was discovered hours later by 2 boys exploring the same structure. His small frame was slumped against the floor, his lips tinged blue, but there were no clear signs of trauma. Police were confused. There were no cuts, no blood, no broken bones. The cause of death wasn't immediately obvious. Initially, the authorities chalked it up to misadventure. A tragic accident, they said. Perhaps Martin fell. Maybe he got trapped in something, or suffered a seizure. No one wanted to imagine foul play, especially not the idea that another child could have been involved. There was a collective denial among the adults. In a community where children roamed freely and adults worked long hours, it was easier to believe in chance than malevolence. But Mary wasn't done. Just hours after the murder, she returned to the scene of the crime. Neighbors reported seeing her standing near the boarded-up house, watching as police moved in and out. She said nothing, offered no tears, no concern. She simply stared, and when a woman mentioned Martin had died, Mary allegedly replied with a disturbing lack of empathy. "Oh, I know. I saw him." She began talking to other children about the incident, not with fear or sorrow but excitement. She told one little girl, "I was there when Martin died." The girl didn't believe her. It sounded like a lie, a bad joke. But Mary's demeanor was too convincing, too calm. She wasn't looking for attention in the traditional sense. She was testing how far she could push the truth without getting caught. A few days later, at Martin's school, Mary's behavior took another unsettling turn. She and Norma Bell broke into the local nursery and vandalized it. They smashed items, scattered papers, and left behind a handful of crude, disturbing notes. The handwriting was unmistakably childlike, full of misspellings and awkward phrasing, but the content was horrifying. "I murder so that I may come back," one note read. "We did murder Martin Brown," said another. "Watch out. We did it again." Authorities dismissed the notes as sick pranks. No one connected the strange messages to Martin's death. Once again, the idea that children could be responsible for such a crime was too unthinkable to accept. It was easier to blame the vandalism on bored kids acting out. No fingerprints were taken. No follow-up inquiries were made. Mary's confidence grew. She had killed once, and no one suspected her. She could walk the streets freely, knowing the truth, and no adult dared to look at her as anything other than a strange little girl. Norma, on the other hand, was visibly shaken. While she had not participated in Martin's death directly, she was now deeply entangled in Mary's dark world. Mary had told her what she had done. Norma didn't believe it at first, but after hearing details no one else could have known, she started to understand the truth. Still, Norma said nothing. She was afraid of Mary, afraid of what might happen if she told someone. Mary had a hold on her, a mix of fear and fascination. It was clear that Mary was the leader, the one in control, and Norma was her frightened audience. Meanwhile, Mary continued to behave strangely. She would draw pictures of children lying dead, mark X over their eyes, and talk about how easy it was to stop someone from breathing. When her teachers confronted her about her drawings, she brushed them off. "It's just a game," she would say. "It's just pretend." But Mary wasn't pretending. She was rehearsing again. The death of Martin Brown should have been a wake-up call, a chance to stop what was coming. But no one saw the warning signs. The police, the teachers, the neighbors, they all missed it. Or perhaps they saw it and chose not to believe it. Mary had gotten away with murder, and it wasn't enough. She was already thinking about her next victim. It was not enough for Mary Bell to kill. She needed the world to know it had happened. She needed to send a message, not to confess, but to taunt, to show that she had outsmarted everyone, and no one had noticed. That's what made the break-in at the local nursery school so chilling. It wasn't random destruction or a childish prank, it was calculated. A warning cloaked in scribbled handwriting and smeared ink. Inside the vandalized building, among the broken furniture and scattered supplies, police found a series of notes left behind by the intruders. Their tone was disturbing, a mixture of childlike spelling and morbid declarations. One read, "I murder so that I may come back." Another simply stated, "We did murder Martin Brown." To investigators, it seemed unbelievable. The suggestion that the same children who broke into a nursery could also be behind the death of a 4-year-old was dismissed as absurd. The police concluded the notes were nothing more than tasteless jokes, maybe written by children who had heard adults whispering about Martin's death and decided to mock it. Either way, they were ignored. The handwriting wasn't examined. The fingerprints weren't lifted. The opportunity to intervene was lost. Again. But to Mary, the notes were more than jokes. They were a performance, a declaration of her growing boldness. It wasn't enough for her to know what she had done, she wanted others to know as well. She began inserting herself deeper into the investigation, approaching neighbors, asking about the dead boy, offering theories, volunteering information she shouldn't have known. She returned to Martin Brown's home and spoke directly with his grieving mother. In a moment that would haunt the woman forever, Mary asked if she could see Martin's body. When told that Martin was dead and buried, Mary pressed further, asking how he looked, how it happened, if he had suffered. Her questions weren't born of confusion or sadness, they were clinical, precise. The questions of someone not mourning a loss, but studying it. By this time, Mary's behavior was raising eyebrows across Scotswood. She had always been odd, but now she seemed obsessed. Teachers noted her drawings becoming darker, her stories more violent. Once, during a school assignment, she wrote a story about a boy who died in an abandoned house. The similarities to Martin's case were too close to ignore. Yet when questioned, she laughed it off. "It's just a story," she said. Norma Bell, Mary's reluctant companion, was growing visibly more anxious. While Norma had not participated in Martin's murder, She had become a key piece in Mary's psychological game. Mary controlled her like a puppet, whispering secrets, threatening her with punishment if she spoke, and forcing her to participate in increasingly dark scenarios. One afternoon, a teacher noticed bruises around Norma's neck. When asked, she said it was nothing. But other children began to speak up. Mary, they said, had been choking them. She had grabbed one girl by the throat until she cried. She told another boy she knew how to kill someone by holding their nose and mouth shut. Each time she was confronted, Mary used the same excuse. It was just a game. But no one was laughing. Mary's fascination with death deepened. She began speaking openly about wanting to watch someone die. She asked questions like, "How do you think they feel when they're dying? Or do you think they know it's coming?" The other children were frightened. Parents began telling their kids to avoid Mary, but it was too late. Her next move had already been set in motion. Then came the killing of animals. Local residents began to find pets mutilated or missing. A dog was found strangled behind a shed. A cat was discovered dead in a garden, its fur singed and belly cut open. While there was no direct evidence linking Mary to these acts, the whispers grew louder. The same children who had once played beside her now crossed the street to avoid her. Still, no one acted. No one called the authorities with enough urgency. Mary was just a strange little girl, and strange little girls weren't killers. But Mary was watching everyone, testing the limits. She had killed once and walked away unnoticed. Now she was rehearsing for something bigger, something more elaborate. She wanted to see if she could do it again. Not just because she wanted to hurt, but because she wanted control. Power. Mary was a child who had lived her entire life feeling powerless, abused, and neglected. Taking a life made her feel like she was finally in charge. Norma, meanwhile, was spiraling. She became more erratic, more emotional. She confided in a classmate that Mary had done something terrible, but when pressed, she denied everything. It was as if she was fighting herself, torn between fear and guilt. She didn't want to be part of this, but she didn't know how to escape. Mary had made sure of that. Police, despite the growing signs of Mary's involvement, remained focused. Elsewhere, the nursery break-in was forgotten, the notes discarded, the warnings unheeded, and Mary, confident now, had begun planning her next kill. She didn't choose her next victim out of rage or revenge. She chose him because she could. It was never personal. It was about the feeling, and she wanted it again. It was the end of July 1968, just over 2 months after the death of Martin Brown, and Mary Bell was ready to kill again. The death of Martin had brought her a rush that nothing else could replicate. The secret of taking a life, of watching others grieve and knowing that she was the cause. It gave her something she had never had before: power, control, and Mary craved that feeling once more. This time, however, she wouldn't leave anything to chance. She wanted to be more involved, more deliberate. The whispers and warnings around the neighborhood didn't scare her. They emboldened her. Adults might have been uneasy around her, but none truly believed she could be dangerous. That blind spot gave her just enough cover to strike again. On July 31st, 3-year-old Brian Howe went missing. He had last been seen playing outside near his home in Scotswood, kicking around a tin can with his siblings and neighborhood children. At some point during the afternoon, Mary and Norma approached Brian. According to later statements, Mary told Brian she had something to show him. She took him by the hand, and the 3 children walked off together, unnoticed. Brian trusted them. Why wouldn't he? They were just other kids from the neighborhood. No one suspected anything sinister. But Mary had already made up her mind. She led Brian to a patch of wasteland behind some old buildings, a place children often used as a shortcut or playground. It was secluded, overgrown with weeds, and littered with discarded junk. No adults would be watching. No one would hear. What happened there? Mary was calm as she began to strangle the boy. Her hands were small, but precise. She knew how to block his airway. He struggled, but she kept her grip firm. Norma, initially watching from the side, purportedly panicked and tried to run, but Mary pulled her back. When Brian stopped moving, Mary wasn't done. She began to mutilate his body, cutting his hair, scratching at his legs and stomach with a pair of scissors she had brought with her. Most disturbingly, she carved the letter M into his abdomen. At first, she had tried to write an N to implicate Norma, but halfway through, she changed it, perhaps realizing it would be more of a signature if she made it her own. Later that evening, Brian's family began to worry. He hadn't returned home. A search party was quickly organized. Dozens of neighbors walked the streets, calling his name, checking alleys and yards. Among those pretending to help were Mary and Norma. They followed the searchers, asking questions, pointing in random directions, suggesting places to look, none of them near the real site. Mary was playing a game. She wanted to see how long it would take for someone to find the body. She wanted to watch their faces when they did. It wasn't until the following day, August 1st, that Brian's body was discovered. A local searcher stumbled upon the small corpse in the overgrown lot, lying among trash and grass. The scene was horrifying. His lips were blue. Puncture wounds were visible on his legs. His genitals had been partially mutilated, and on his stomach was the crude M carved into his flesh. This time, the police knew they were dealing with murder. There was no ambiguity, no way to call this an accident. The injuries were deliberate, sadistic. Scotland Yard was called in, and the investigation began immediately. Police canvassed the area, interviewing neighbors and children alike. They wanted to know who had seen Brian last. Both Mary and Norma had. Mary's story was odd from the beginning. She gave inconsistent timelines. She inserted unnecessary details. At one point, she asked an officer, "Do you think Brian had scissors nearby when he died?" That question stopped the officer cold. The detail about scissors hadn't been released to the public. Only someone involved in the crime could have known. But when asked to repeat herself, Mary laughed nervously and said she was just making a guess. Police took note. Norma, meanwhile, was cracking. Under pressure, she began to show signs of distress. Her story kept changing. She became hysterical when interviewed alone, eventually confessing that Mary had killed Brian. She claimed she had tried to stop her but was too scared. Investigators were cautious. Norma wasn't the most reliable witness, but the weight of her confession was enough to warrant deeper scrutiny. Both girls were arrested on August 5, 1968. During interrogation, Mary remained eerily composed. She denied everything, even as the evidence mounted. Her demeanor was strange, not frightened or angry, just detached. She seemed more annoyed than anything else, like a child being scolded for a prank that had gone too far. Her words were measured, her tone calm. When police showed her the notes left in the vandalized nursery, some of which matched her handwriting, Mary denied writing them. But it was clear to the officers that they were dealing with someone far beyond her years and manipulation. While Norma broke down in tears, Mary stared blankly. She refused to admit any involvement, even as Norma told the entire story. The community was stunned. The idea that two young girls, one barely 11, could have committed such a violent act was almost impossible to grasp. People who had seen Mary walking to school, who had given her sweets or scolded her for mischief, suddenly saw her in a different light. Not as a child, but as something darker, something broken. As the investigation deepened, more disturbing details emerged. Psychiatrists were brought in. Experts debated whether Mary was capable of understanding the magnitude of her crimes. Some said she was deeply disturbed, a product of horrific abuse and neglect. Others believed she was calculating, possibly even sociopathic. Whatever the case, the evidence was clear. Mary Bell had killed not once, but twice, and now, for the first time, the world had no choice but to take her seriously. The courtroom was filled with silence, tension, and an overwhelming sense of disbelief. The accused stood barely taller than the witness box. Her hands were small, her legs barely touched the floor when she sat. Yet Mary Bell, just 11 years old, was being tried for murder 2 counts. The public was captivated, horrified, and, above all, confused. How could someone so young do something so monstrous? The media dubbed her the evil child, while others wondered if she was a tragic product of abuse and neglect. The truth was not easy to categorize. Mary Bell and Norma Bell, unrelated but charged together, stood trial in December 1968 at Newcastle Asylum. It was one of the most disturbing cases the British legal system had ever faced. The courtroom was packed. Press from around the world attended, and the public hung on every word. Journalists described the scene as surreal, to schoolgirls in neat uniforms accused of crimes that even hardened criminals would struggle to justify. Mary pled not guilty to both charges. She sat stone-faced through much of the trial, her eyes sometimes darting to her mother in the gallery, Betty Bell, who appeared more interested in the media attention than the fate of her daughter. Norma, on the other hand, looked terrified. She wept during testimony, often needing breaks due to panic. The contrast between the 2 girls couldn't have been more stark. Mary was composed and controlled. Norma was unstable and overwhelmed. The prosecution painted Mary as manipulative, dangerous, and cold-hearted. They emphasized the disturbing details: the carved M on Brian Howe's stomach, the chilling nursery school notes, her inappropriate comments at crime scenes, and most damning of all, Norma's confession. They argued that Mary had a fascination with death and a need for power that drove her to commit acts of extraordinary cruelty. Norma, they said, was a weak, suggestible girl who was drawn into Mary's dark games, but had not participated in the killings themselves. Her defense team tried to portray her as a victim, someone mentally incapable of standing up to Mary's influence. They emphasized Norma's limited intellectual abilities and emotional immaturity. Experts testified that she could not fully grasp the nature of her involvement or the seriousness of what Mary had done. Mary's defense leaned heavily on her upbringing. Psychiatrists described the environment she had been raised in: a chaotic home, a deeply unstable mother, repeated exposure to sexual abuse, and years of emotional and physical trauma. Betty Bell was painted as a neglectful, possibly psychotic woman who had treated Mary not as a daughter, but as a nuisance, something to be gotten rid of or exploited. Experts argued that Mary exhibited signs of psychopathy, but cautioned that this diagnosis in a child was rare and controversial. What was undeniable was that Mary had been shaped by cruelty. She had learned early on that love was conditional, pain was normal, and survival meant manipulating others before they could manipulate you. The defense did not deny Mary's involvement in Brian's death, but sought to convince the jury that she did not fully understand the nature of her actions, that she was acting out not from true malice, but from a disturbed, undeveloped mind, craving control in a life where she had none. The jury deliberated for hours over the course of several days. They were faced with an impossible question. How do you judge a child who kills? Is she a monster or a victim? Should she be punished like an adult or rehabilitated like a child? In the end, the jury reached a nuanced decision. On December 17, 1968, Mary Bell was found guilty of manslaughter in both deaths on the grounds of diminished responsibility. They accepted that she had psychological problems that impaired her ability to understand and control her actions. It was a verdict that shocked some and infuriated others. Many wanted to see her tried as an adult, sentenced for murder. Instead, she was sentenced to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure and indefinite sentence, without a set release date, allowing the government to determine how long she should be held. Norma Bell was acquitted. The jury found that while she had been present, there was not enough evidence to convict her of participation. She walked free, but not without consequences. Her reputation in the community was ruined. She would live in fear, stigma, and silence for years to come. Mary, however, was taken from the courtroom under heavy guard. The press swarmed, flashbulbs exploded, and the world watched as a girl of 11, convicted of killing 2 toddlers, disappeared behind the walls of the British justice system. Over the years, Mary Bell would be transferred between various facilities. At first, she was placed in a secure children's home, more educational than punitive, but she quickly proved difficult to manage. She attempted to escape. She exhibited violent behavior. Eventually, she was moved to a more secure psychiatric institution. Psychologists continued to evaluate her, some labeling her a danger to society, others insisting she could be rehabilitated. In the eyes of the law, she had no fixed release date. The public, meanwhile, debated whether she should ever be released at all. Many believed she was a threat who would always remain dangerous. Others saw her as a victim of systematic failure born into abuse, abandoned by those meant to protect her, and left to become a reflection of the horrors she endured. Whatever the opinion, one fact remained. Mary Bell had done something so rare, so horrifying, that her name would never be forgotten. Not because she was the youngest killer, not even because of the brutality of her crimes, but because she forced society to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes, evil wears the face of a child. Mary Bell was gone from public view, but her story was far from over. After her sentencing in December 1968, she disappeared behind the walls of a system that was uncertain how to handle someone like her. She wasn't just a criminal. She wasn't just a child. She was something that didn't fit neatly into any category. A murderer at 11 years old. The courts had declared her guilty of manslaughter with diminished responsibility, but the world saw something far more sinister. The newspapers labeled her a child killer. The press followed her every move, even behind closed doors, and the British public couldn't decide whether to pity her or fear her. Mary's early years in detention were turbulent. At first, she was held in a secure children's home, part prison, part reformatory. It was not a facility designed for children convicted of serious crimes, and staff quickly found themselves overwhelmed. Mary lashed out at others. She refused to follow rules. She attempted to manipulate counselors, lie to psychiatrists, and exert dominance over the other children. Over time, her behavior grew even more unpredictable. She tried to escape. She broke items. She made threats. It became clear that the environment was not equipped to rehabilitate someone with her level of trauma and psychological disturbance. Eventually, she was transferred to a more secure psychiatric facility, where she spent the majority of her teenage years. There, experts tried to understand what made Mary Bell who she was. Over the years, she was subjected to countless psychological evaluations. Some doctors believed she was deeply disturbed but capable of change. Others feared she was inherently dangerous, capable of deception and violence under a seemingly calm exterior. One therapist called her highly manipulative, intelligent, and emotionally detached. Another insisted she was a wounded child, acting out learned patterns of abuse. As the years passed, Mary began to change. She grew older, quieter, and more reflective, at least on the surface. She completed educational programs, engaged in therapy sessions, and began to show signs of remorse. Whether that remorse was genuine or simply a performance was a question that would haunt authorities for decades. Mary was nothing if not intelligent. She knew how to say the right things, when to cry, when to remain silent. She had spent her entire childhood learning to survive by adapting to those around her. Now, in confinement, she used those same survival skills to reshape her image. By the time she turned 16, conversations about her future began to take place behind closed doors. Could she be released one day? Should she? The public was largely against the idea. The memory of what she had done, Martin Brown and Brian Howe, was still fresh in the minds of many. But legally, Mary's sentence allowed for eventual release. Her confinement was indefinite, not permanent. In 1980, at the age of 23, Mary Bell was quietly released from custody. She had served 12 years. Her release was done under strict conditions. She was given a new identity, a new location, and a chance to start over. Government agencies worked in secret to ensure her safety, not out of sympathy but necessity. There were people who wanted her dead. Threats had already been made. The story of Mary Bell still enraged the public, and the idea of her walking freely among them was too much for some to bear. The years that followed were marked by secrecy and silence. Mary lived under a new name. Her whereabouts were kept confidential. Occasionally, rumors surfaced claims that she had been spotted working at a shop or raising a family, but none were confirmed. Then, in the 1990s, her story re-emerged into the spotlight when it was revealed that she had become a mother. The media erupted. The public was furious. Many felt that someone who had taken the lives of 2 children should never be allowed to raise one of her own. In 2003, Mary Bell went to court again, this time to protect her daughter. She sought and won a lifetime anonymity order, allowing both her and her child to live under new identities permanently. The ruling was controversial, but legally justified. The courts argued that her daughter had the right to privacy and safety, independent of her mother's past. Still, the backlash was swift and brutal. Tabloids screamed in protest. Some even tried to track her down, exposing innocent people in the process. But Mary remained hidden. Today, Mary Bell would be in her late 60s. She exists somewhere under a different name, living an ordinary life, at least outwardly. No one knows who she is or where she lives, and that mystery keeps her story alive. For some, she's a symbol of how the system fails both children and victims. For others, she's proof that even the most monstrous crimes can be committed by the most unexpected hands. But the debate continues. Was Mary Bell a cold-blooded killer born evil, or a product of relentless abuse, shaped into something dangerous, by a world that never gave her a chance? The answer remains elusive. What's clear, however, is that her story changed the way society views childhood, justice, and responsibility forever. It forced the legal system to confront what happens when innocence becomes twisted, when a child, meant to be protected, becomes the one others must be protected from. Mary Bell didn't just kill 2 little boys, she shattered the illusion that children cannot be dangerous, and in doing so, she left behind a legacy not of violence alone, but of a question that still echoes today. What happens when a child becomes a killer?